So yeah, hi everybody. This is our first for the leaders in technology and transformation consulting, and we thought that we would do the first one on making change stick. The reason for this is because a lot of our end clients have sort of been coming to us recently and saying we're really good at doing the actual transformation, but we're not so good in the aftermath and when we're trying to get all of our employees to really adapt to the changes and adopt the new ways of working, etc. So we thought we sort of bring this one together, bring a couple of people along who are absolute proper leaders in transformation with all of their consulting experience. So I will let them introduce themselves. So I think, Fredrik, you might be up first.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. The topic is really near to us at Emergn. We have been seeing the challenge of change and improvements go away. So we have been in the business 11 years, trying to different ways and have experience to share, I think, now on how to make change stick. So mainly enterprise experience I will be talking from would be Maersk Line, Credit Suisse, Walmart, and GSK. So in that sense, I feel definitely both honored and happy to be able to contribute. So that was my short plug. I think Stephen's up next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Moffitt, and I'm a partner in a consultancy called Atmosphere. We work with senior leaders and boards to really start to develop what we call an adaptive business. And so it's more than just a transformation. It's building the skills, the tools, and the frameworks in order to be able to constantly respond to uncertainty and change, because I think one of the big things that we all see is that change isn't going away. The environment around us is changing, COVID, economic situations, new technologies, so forth. So what we do is we help senior leadership teams and boards then develop the skills to lead through uncertainty. And this is basically the distillation of myself and my two partners over 25 years of working in transformation, digital venture building, and strategic advising.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stephen. I think maybe Simon's next.
Thank you. Hi, my name's Simon Adams. I come from a consultancy called 9 Feet Tall. We are what I would class a boutique consultancy specializing in landing change successfully. But what that typically means is that we help organizations through thinking about strategically how do you plan and implement change, and then to actually making it land successfully, typically around technology-enabled change, or it might be more sort of organizational-led. So my experience and background, I've worked in consulting for about nearly 15 years now, and prior to that, having worked in different industries and sectors. And I guess my passion is about how we actually look at the people side of change and really leverage the value of networks and community, and how that can actually have a really positive impact on making projects and change successful.
Brilliant. Zoe, how about you?
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Zoë Gould, and I'm a delivery principal at Kainos. So Kainos is probably on the larger end of the kind of consultancies and that we're talking about today. But obviously for Kainos, we've very much grown out of being kind of a supplier, having spent a long time kind of growing, working in partnership in the public and private sector to deliver real transformational change. But one of the things we've obviously realised is pretty much the topic of today. We've worked with our clients to deliver all of this fantastic change, but so often the thing that hampers it is that kind of missing spark. You know, they haven't quite got the culture lined up. They haven't got quite the change quite landing right. So as much as we work with them to deliver the change, it doesn't always stick. So we now have brought in what we're calling kind of our digital advisory agency, which is made up of consultants like myself with lots of experience working in kind of various sectors. So I work with the public sector primarily, to really understand what's hampering that change from sticking and how can we work with them to get that delivered better, because that's obviously going to benefit us all.
Brilliant. Ravi, last but not least.
Hello, good morning. Thank you, Francesca, and thanks everyone. So my name's Ravi. I'm a partner at Arca Blanca. Arca Blanca is an integrated data and consulting business. So we have an integrated team that has some very experienced change and transformation experts, data scientists, technologists, and industry experts. And what we do is we work with leaders at typically FTSE 100, FTSE 250, or similar sized private businesses, taking the things that are holding them back on their growth agenda and resolving those issues with a combination of business change and smart technology, AI, data science, etc. And a big part of our ethos is you can't just land technology, you can't just land digital data in businesses. It's the holistic change you've got to think about in the ways of working. So that's why we have that integrated team. So I look forward to telling you more.
Cool, fantastic. So yeah, let's kick off with questions. So the first question, what's the biggest change that Cobid has brought to your consultancy? Zoe, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably one thing many of us will talk about is the main change for us has been that pivot away from kind of face-to-face to doing everything remotely. Obviously, everybody's been through that, whether you're a consultant or not, but certainly kind of for consultants, that's definitely been a really big change, and definitely been something we've really had to think about. How do you do that well when you're trying to work in partnership with your clients, when you're trying to look at how do you change their culture, how do you change their ways of working? There are lots of things you would always consider previously, you know, how are their teams working together? Things as simple as what's their office set up like, and all of that kind of stuff. And you do that sat with them, observing how they work and, you know, what the relationships are like and all of that kind of stuff, that actually with COVID, those organizations are having to go through a massive change to how they work outside of the transformation they were trying to deliver already. So we've had to really pivot quickly and not only think about, well, how do we help you deliver this transformational change you were trying to deliver, but how do we also help you do that in a way that works with your staff working remotely? And obviously for us working a lot with the public sector, that's with government departments who've been dealing with pandemic responses as it kind of goes through. So it's really been kind of, how do we best work with them when they're trying to deal with massive change, to also best deliver that change in a way that benefits them and the public.
Can I just add? So I think, you know, from my perspective and thinking about both client and also internally. So for 9 Feet Tall, you know, we're a small organisation, and that means that we have the benefit of agility in many respects. So the pandemic, you know, for everybody had a big knock-on impact in terms of the ways of working. What we've seen is it's also had a real sort of impact in terms of challenging culturally who we are and how we operate. So from the perspective of, we were always an organisation that was very much about people being able to engage and have the opportunity to meet on a face-to-face basis and, you know, work through mentoring, coaching opportunities. And that, when the pandemic hit and everybody went remote, that became a really challenging thing to be able to continue. How do you create that connection on a personal level when you're interacting through a screen? And there is no substitute for that, but we've had to really think out of the box and look at other ways to really encourage and make opportunities for people to connect and for them to be able to have those conversations and feel that they're in a comfortable space, as well as then, as the pandemic has started to come down, is then open up those opportunities then to be able to also be supplemented with being able to meet face to face. And I think that that is not just the problem that we've faced internally, but we've then seen that also resonate with our clients who have gone through the similar sort of challenge. So it's been an interesting situation where you're partly learning yourself as well as being able to advise and guide clients on a similar basis. I can see Stephen and Ravi want to add something, so I've got other bits, but I'll let them add in first.
Sure, thanks, Simon. So yeah, I completely would echo what Zoe and Simon have said. The idea of working with clients when you want to interact with them and with colleagues through a screen is incredibly difficult. So working out how you do that and how you enrich that is really important. Like Simon, we went through a very big internal growth at Arca Blanca throughout the COVID pandemic. And one thing we're very big on is how do you form a strong culture, both for us, but also our joint teams with clients? And we're very fortunate. Our people team really stepped up and did an outstanding job in setting up lots and lots of different ways to engage with our people, with our clients. Everything from murder mystery evenings with clients invited, because we're not able to go down to the pub with them after a hard day of work. So let's send around little bottles of wine and have a wine tasting virtually. One thing that was very high on our agenda was mental health throughout the whole pandemic. Mental Health Week was a focal point of that, but actually throughout the entire pandemic, it really was very tough, particularly for more junior members of staff. We found both ourselves and clients who were in working environments where they didn't have a communal space. They might have been sharing with several other people. So how do you give them the ability to kind of express themselves, get out of their bubble? And that involves thinking quite holistically about their physical and mental well-being, more than just in the office at work, but how do we make sure people aren't in front of their screens all the time? How do we enforce breaks? So walking meetings, for example. So when you've got an internal call, let's say to everyone, stand up on your feet, let's get out there and chat while we walk around our local park. So there are lots and lots of really interesting creative things that we did and you can do. I think the starting point of all of this is to be able to make sure you understand quite fully what are the pressures on people, because for every person will be quite different. I have a toddler at home, and that was a different ballpark to some of my colleagues who were unencumbered by children, but were sharing a flat with 5 other people. So I think it hit everyone very differently, and starting with a recognition of that, and then working out creative ways to overcome them was really kind of the secret to our success. Stephen, sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
Thanks, Ravi. I echo a lot of what everybody has said, but there one slightly different aspect to it is that we found that COVID has actually made it a lot easier for us to communicate our message, which is about being able to manage change and uncertainty. And so in some ways, it's been very good for us because everybody has this lived communal experience of intense uncertainty, intense change, and how do you manage both yourself as a leadership team, but also the business as a whole, from HR to operations to everything. And for us as a team, we've always been virtual. We have partners in the UK, Sweden, and associates as far away as New Zealand. So in a sense, we've been having to develop virtual community for quite a while. But it's been very interesting working with some of our partners and with our clients for those organizations that were very focused on the face-to-face, day-to-day interaction. It has been a major challenge. The other thing has been working with leadership teams to help them be comfortable with not having complete control over their employees. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we've seen, is that the culture of being able to see somebody there, making sure they're working, being able to stay, kind of either control or to mentor to whatever it is, but that in a sense, having to develop a different kind of trust and then measuring and then finding ways to measure, success and help the teams grow and reach their targets has been one of the profound changes that we've seen.
I think that's completely true, and there's a couple of points that I think Ravi you mentioned, and also Stephen you've touched on. So that sort of trying to create something that's a bit more bespoke and appeals to everybody in everybody's situation is a real challenge, and it isn't just a challenge sort of as a result of the pandemic, but prior to that. And if we think about change in general, about recognizing that everybody has different sort of drivers, different purpose and values. And so the pandemic specifically created challenges with ways of working. We have team members that are younger, and therefore that their environment that they work in at home could be their bedroom, whereas people that have been in a career or have a more senior job, they might have an office, and therefore creating an opportunity for people to excel and really enjoy their work has been a real challenge, because you can't make just a single decision and say that's going to apply for everybody. You have to be much more nuanced and aware of the impact of those decisions that you make around your ways of working as an organization. And I think that's been the same for our clients, is, where you are a large organization and you have such diversity, you could be a retailer that has bricks and mortar and you've got people who actually need to go into the office. The positioning and messaging of why you're making decisions is very different to someone who may be more office-based and they have the opportunity to be able to work from home. And so that's been a really interesting element for people to try and navigate and get through. And then as individuals, I think, it's fascinating to reflect on the fact that prior to the pandemic, how often did you see a government present a PowerPoint slide with data on it? It didn't happen. And we all suddenly became experts in analyzing and interpreting data. These slides showing us that, infections are going up, and, what does that mean? What does it driving us to? And it's really changed the way that as a society we've looked and understood information, and that's then flowed into organizations. So now when you're talking to your business, you may then feel much more comfortable about using data to try and explain your decision making. And there's been this, prior to the pandemic, there's been this drive of organizations talking about becoming data driven. It feels like the pandemic has accelerated some of those opportunities. And then from a workforce perspective, the pandemic has also accelerated the question about purpose and value. And that's been important for us as a consultancy, but I think it's also important for organizations in terms of the way that they operate and what they do going forward. So if we think about the workforce post-pandemic, we're now seeing a big wave of people really taking the opportunity to reevaluate what is it that they want to do and who do they want to work for. And quite often that is now coming more down to what is the purpose of the organization? How do they bring value to not just you as an individual, i.e. the employee, but also the world and what they operate in? What do they bring to society? And that's a really interesting challenge then to think about in terms of how do you make that relevant? How do you attract and bring people that are talent in making you successful, whether it's transformation or whatever it is you do? And that narrative is now really starting to change. I can see, Zoe, you want to add something?
Yeah, just to agree, actually. So within Kainos, we've been very involved in a lot of kind of the healthcare response, especially in the UK. And actually, one of the things we're really seeing a lot is how much kind of our clients are really cottoning on to prioritization is key, especially at the moment. obviously a lot of money has been spent within the pandemic response. Government is now trying to kind of crack down on budgets, etc. So departments are really now thinking about, well, actually the amount of money we've got is fixed. It's probably less than, you know, we wanted. That's always the case, but we know what we've got to do. We really understand kind of what our remit is and actually how we're going to come back from the pandemic. How do we prioritize what we need to do? And certainly as consultants, that is a lot of the kind of conversations we're getting asked more and more to get involved in. Not just how do we deliver change, but actually what change should we be delivering first? Where is the value we can add? How can we understand where to best kind of spend our budget, and what can we deliver that will really add the most value quickest?
Yeah, no, I think actually what everybody said is sort of raised a couple of points that I hadn't necessarily thought about, especially Ravi, you mentioned that you would do social events together with your clients. Now, as some clients are potentially starting to return back to normal, potentially start to go back into the office a bit more, and we've got a bit of a hybrid way of working with some clients, do you think that the way that the clients handle the sort of the slow transition or potentially no transition, do you think that will affect how change can be delivered in their organization? And do you think that will affect how you sort of, you know, alter your ways of working? Go for it, Zoe. I believe you've got your hand up.
So I think one of the things we're really having to think about a lot is how do we keep everybody engaged and involved in that process? You know, for this, I think accessibility is going to be really, really key. And, you know, as a consultant, a lot of our lives used to be going and sitting with clients and kind of talking to people around a table about what they want to achieve and, you know, drawing fantastic things on the wall, which is still what my son thinks my actual job is. But actually now not everybody's going to be returning to the office. Not all companies are fully committed to returning to the office. Within Kainos, we're kind of saying, no, it'll be case by case basis, depending on what you're working on. You might have to go in for key meetings, but there is no expectation that everybody will go back to the office full time. And that's completely right, because we've proved you don't have to. We're now doing a lot more kind of remote and virtual and working with clients much further afield rather than pairing consultants up with, you know, companies that are local to them. But, you know, people, whether it's because of health concerns, whether it's care concerns, whether it's just it's better for their own mental health or whatever, are not returning to the office. Our job is to think about, but how do we still involve those people and work with those people and kind of make sure those people are engaged and able to give their opinion and, you know, build those relationships in the best possible way, whether they're in the office or not. And that's a really careful balance that we're all going to have to consider. So it doesn't matter whether you're in the office or out of the office, you're still getting to get involved and give your opinion in the same way and build that relationship. Fredrik, I think you had your hand up first.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to fill in and build on for what we're seeing is really we work with education, which sort of moved online and was turned into both sort of individual and instructor-led remotely. So that is not really affected, but I think the mental model when we work with teams is that the default setup is now to always expect the team to be distributed, to be working remotely and collaborating through time zones. For when we work with leadership, that they've always been in the enterprises distributed, and you would still have to do a lot of one-to-one interactions, which works now nearly as well, at least remotely. But it is for the coaching support and getting the team dynamics and the empathy. It makes it a little bit harder or slightly longer timescales. But I do think that we are now always counting on the team structure being distributed, as opposed to a lot of history through Agile has been on co-location. So I think that is one of the big changes and takeaways we will look at a year or two from now. So that was my input. I think Ravi, could you fill in?
Oh yeah. So let me just add a couple of things. One of which is probably not the most popular thing to say, but let me start with the less contentious one. So I completely agree with what Zoe said about we have now demonstrated how you can work as an organization effectively in a hybrid manner, and I think it is a hybrid manner. There is now no need for most organizations, obviously there are exceptions, or many organizations, to be in the office 5 days a week, and having flexibility is wonderful for people. So I've spent the last 3 days in my client's office, I'm spending today at home, and I'm spending tomorrow in Arca Blanca's office. So I think hybrid working is wonderful. It gives people more flexibility, and if used intelligently, you can get more from your people, give them a better work-life balance, and actually allow their work and their personal lives not to be different things, but actually one integrated whole. And that's great. What I was going to say that's slightly less popular is one thing I really worry about, one thing we think about a lot is our more junior employees in particular, and this will be slightly pejorative language, some of them don't know better. So we have almost doubled our size during lockdown, and many of our clients have grown during lockdown. And some of the people we've recruited do not have the experience of what it is like to be in a workplace where you've got great coaching, where you've got great exposure to leadership, where you've got great mentoring, and the learning you get from being around other people in the office and the organic seeping in and the learning. And the example I would give is in my early career, my very first job, I was told, go and sit next to Edward at that desk because he's doing something really interesting, just listening to what's happening, and he'll draw you into stuff, and you learn so much about it from there. So I think there is something to be said about, and I don't think this would anyone would disagree with this, about leadership having a great a great role to play in setting what is the standard, what do we expect from our people, what is the culture we want, and trying to avoid the anarchy of people doing what they think is good for them, because what might work for a particular client in a particular scenario is wonderful, but what works to bring together a culture where people have shared values, shared purpose. I think purpose is a really important word in this, so that we are all in it, we are an integrated team, and we know each other really, really well, is so important as well. So I think getting that balance right, making sure we acknowledge hybrid working, we acknowledge the balance between work and life is different, but at the same time having some clear guidelines for that, so that you can build culture is really important to us. I don't know if Simon or Stephen was next.
I'm going to jump in if that's all right. Just beat you to it, Stephen. I think that what everyone said is really important, really valid point. So I guess if we take a step back and we talk more about how to deliver change effectively, I think what we've seen from organisations is, what's been really important and what is fundamentally changing is that recognition that you have to really tailor and be really focused on how you land your message to get and build buy-in. So whereas previously, this way of working where we might have been in an office and you can get people together and you can have that conversation, you have people there that can listen. It's much easier now to lurk in the background. You can turn your camera off, you can disengage quite easily from the mainstream and what's going on in an organization. So you have to tailor and craft your purpose, your message, what it is that you're doing and why it brings value and how it's important to the individual, so that they buy in and they want to be part of that. And then the ways of working fundamentally, as we've been talking about, are different. There's a real opportunity here to have greater agility in the way that you work and what it is that you do. No longer do you need a team that necessarily starts at 9 and finishes at 5 and everybody's sat in the same room working away. That opportunity now exists where organizations can leverage the ability for people to be working part-time or different time zones, and and it becomes the norm. It becomes the fabric of how you work and what it is that you're doing. And then that seeps into how do you communicate? How do you keep people aware of the progress and the status of what's happening? So I think the actual activity of being able to support and enable organizations to deliver and successfully land change is still the same, but it's the nuance of how you go about doing that. I guess there's one other area, and sorry, Stephen, I will pass over to you in a second, that I just would like to pick up on, and that's about the start of the funnel. So what is driving change? So pre-pandemic, we all know we had vision, strategies, everything that was going on, and that would quite often lead into some sort of transformation. The pandemic in some cases has accelerated and given the opportunity for those things to really gain feet and create progress. But I think it's also created a lot of opportunity for organizations to reset and go, well, actually, let me think about the way that we operate. What is our operating model and who we are? How do we organize ourselves? So going back to sort of target operating model, business operating models, the culture, the purpose, the way that you structure yourself and how you make decisions. Before now, you say yes, and we're going to accelerate some sort of transformation. So what we are seeing is some of those things that are in progress are starting to be paused and questioned because they now recognize that there is a need to rethink what does this mean to how we operate as an organization, and who are the people, the skills, the capabilities, and how we use consultants in that mix rather than having that skill set in-house. Because people will walk with their feet now. The barrier to be able to leave an organization is much lower, and you can then transition very quickly. So getting that right is becoming a higher priority than it has in the past, in my experience. Sorry, Stephen.
Thanks. I think one of the things that I wanted to raise here is this, that there is no normal. There's no return to normal. And I think the sooner that we all accept that reality, the better it is. We're entering into a new paradigm, and I think we've all kind of touched on pieces of that new paradigm. And there's generations coming into the workforce who don't know the old way of doing things. They've only experienced the new way. And so as consultants, and then as our clients, the leaders of these organizations, I think the sooner that we make the shift that we are entering into a new world, and what does that mean? And we like to use this metaphor of sailing. So we're navigating uncharted waters here, and there's going to be a lot of tacking to and fro and learning as we go along. But if we're kind of clear the destination that we want to get to, and we have some tools and some frameworks, we can move in that direction. And I've been in kind of transformation and change for a long, long time, and I wouldn't dare to predict what the new world is going to look like. But I do know that there's pieces of it starting to appear and come together. And this is, I think, the biggest challenge that leadership teams have. And this is where we've been kind of trying to work the most with them, is to really start to accept this uncertainty and then find a way to communicate, whether it's purpose or vision or some direction and guidance that can allow for the pivots, allow for the changes, the experimentation, but doesn't feel like everything is out of control, which is, I think, one of the big things that a lot of us probably experienced in various points over the last year and a half or so.
Sure. Cool. Let's take things away from COVID and the new normal. In your experience, is change more commonly brought on by a consultancy or by an end client? And I guess as a sort of sub point to that, do you think the success of the change is influenced by who initiated the change? Simon, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I guess it can be either fundamentally, and more often than not, consultancies exist because there is a need, and a client fundamentally is trying to achieve something which we have experience and capability to be able to help to support. I think what's an interesting thing to reflect on, and something that we're actively considering, is about how that's best to put this, how as an organization you can be a force for good in some respects. So the way that you operate and the values and the purpose that you have, how that creates an opportunity for organizations to leverage that, not just in the transactional activity of helping through some sort of transformation or change, but also in how that ways of working and that inertia then has an impact on the culture and the behavior of an organization. So what we have started to see is that we have relationships that traditionally might not have started on the basis of change, of the client seeing that they need to change, but actually now more on the awareness of what it is that we do as an organization, and wanting to work with you irrespective of whether they have a change agenda. So they see that as a relationship and an opportunity that can actually create change within their organization and inertia in the right direction. So it's a two-way activity. It's as much about all of us talking about where should you be going, and these are the things that you can be looking at, as well as the pull of organizations saying, actually, we've got a skills gap, we've got a problem here, we're not sure how best to deliver and enable transformation or change as an organization. So I think we both play an important role in that, and that is evolving at the moment. I'm not sure who had their hand up next.
I'll go. I think ultimately it's got to be the end client. The client has to drive the change because they're the ones that are changing. So whether that is the client coming to the consultancy and saying, hi, we want to change, or as Simon said, the client comes to us for some other reason, and along the way they discover that, well, in order to do this thing that we want to do, we actually need to change. The consultancy hopefully is there to help bridge the knowledge, the skills gap, and be in a position ultimately to walk away. And I think this is kind of our fundamental view as consultants. We want to walk away. I mean, we're consultants because we like to do different things. So if that's the case, then how can we best serve the business to grow the skills, the confidence, the processes, the technologies, whatever it is that they need to not only make the initial change, but to make it stick. And I think that's kind of the key bit that, the reason that we're here is talking about this, is that it comes down to the client recognizing and owning that change. And I can write all the lovely strategy pieces, I can do all the PowerPoint slides I want, but if they haven't made that step as an organization, then it won't go anywhere. And I think we've all had plenty of examples of transformations that have, quote, failed. The wonderful 70% of all transformations fail statistic.
I'd like to fill in and agree somewhat and disagree slightly. I think we're all on the page of exit strategy and ownership, and for the organization to function, it needs to be a unit that is not dependent on the perpetual help with the skills and understanding. So I think the ownership is very clear. At Emergn, we typically work on three things across the organization. So one is, we talked about the culture and the mindset and the shift. And I think that really needs to be catalysts and need outside influence to make it stick, to change the habits, to change the thinking. When it comes to changing mechanics or the processes and the technologies, etc., it is basically should be led by the ones who gets the best following. And the same thing goes when we talk about governance structure, measures, KPIs, and we talked about data, how to visualize. That really needs to be owned and encompassed by the organization who makes the decisions, and that should be the organization. So in that sense, when it comes to skills, mindset, and culture shift, I think that's where we as consultants have the ability and the strength to instill new habits, new thinking that should give new results. And that is where we should be leading. But we will never be owning in that sense. So that's for my 10 cents. Ravi, I think
Sure.
you're just to the right of me in the list. So that's why I'm going to go to you.
Sure, thanks. So yes, I would echo a lot of that, but I think that there's something a bit more subtle here, because I'm a great believer in joint team working. I think most of my colleagues on the call are as well. Forming a joint team between consultants and between people within the organization that's leading the change. And a really important part of that is, one thing I will always say to my clients and our sponsors is, I want you to give your best people to this program to become joint team members with us. Because if this is important to you, you don't want to put contractors onto it. You don't want consultants leading it. You want it to be co-owned by transformation experts, which is who we are. We bring that expertise of how do you design and implement successful programs, and people who are your future business leaders, who know your organization. And I often give them this kind of picture of who I mean by that. So I'm looking for your bright young stars, mid-management, so they've been around long enough that they know everyone in the organization. They have the clout to get across and do work. At the same time, they haven't been with the organization so long, they're jaded by this is the only way we do things. And ultimately, you are giving them, by being part of this change and transformation, a step up in their career path. And they are designing the changes that one day, hopefully, they will be inheriting as the future leaders of the business. Now, within that joint team paradigm, I think there's a shift of leadership. For me, often in our programs, in the early days, when you're designing the change, going back to what Simon said at the beginning, why does consulting exist? Why are consultants brought in? Well, we're there because we've got the expertise in how do you design a new piece of technology, a new operating model, a new way of working. How do you adapt culture? We've got the expertise in what's the right program structure. So what I often say to my clients is, look, in the early days when we're designing the change, we will be leading. And of course, we're looking to leadership to make the critical decisions. Only you can make them. But we will be leading in terms of pace and expertise and cross-sector knowledge that we're bringing in. But when it comes to implementation, at that point, your joint team members should be the ones stepping up, leading work streams, really being on the front foot. And if we haven't achieved that they're comfortable doing that, a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, you're not going to get change effectively on the ground. It certainly won't stick. And the other thing is, when you go into implementation, you can only change as fast as the organization can accept that change and react to that change. It's very hard, well, it's impossible to go faster than is possible. So what have we done in the engagement to ensure that the organization has the change capacity to absorb that? And that comes down to leadership, it comes down to engagement, it comes down to joint team working. And one final thing I'd say is, in all my career, the most successful transformations I've led have been ones where towards the end of a program, as the consulting team is rolling off and we're having farewell drinks, all that kind of stuff, there are people who come forward and go, I never knew you were consultants. I never knew you were external. Very hard to do with small organizations, much more common with big organizations. We just know that there was this change team that worked really well. We thought you'd been around in the organization all this time as employees, as one of us. You've got our email addresses, you've got our lanyards, you've never used the title of your consultancy in the work you do. And that's a really heartwarming moment for us when we're at the end of our time with businesses. Simon, I think you're next.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that point absolutely resonates hugely. I think there's that sort of transition at the point at the start is much bigger, and consultancy is typically driving, because that's the reason why you're there. You're bringing the expertise, the skills, the capability to try and advise and guide on the best practice. And then as you get closer towards the end of that sort of delivery engagement, whatever it may be, then absolutely the aim is to leave a legacy of people feeling empowered and capable of being able to deliver change successfully for themselves. And therefore the organization, not just the project or the team, have that ability now to be able to do that. And I think you're quite right, Ravi, is, you want to come away from that relationship feeling like you were part of what made that organization successful, and not an external factor that was put upon to guide and deliver. That resonates with me, certainly. I guess that there was one other part that I was just thinking about in terms of this challenge of being able to influence clients on starting change. And so we, as an organization, have been thinking more about this concept of being a force for good. And so there are organizations out there that we all know about, and we all hear. There's been various press releases and so on. Brewdog might be a good example, where the culture and the capability appears to be toxic for different reasons. And so they offer a really interesting opportunity for us as consultancy organizations that can enable change to actively engage with them and try and help them navigate through that. And there's other organizations that we may all come into contact with that don't know that they have a problem. And so often my team might get involved where they're asked to help with an ERP delivery, but the actual issue is not the delivery of the ERP. It's a fundamental sort of cultural operating model sort of problem. And so our value and our purpose is about identifying and creating those opportunities and signposting to either existing clients or trying to work with people that we think we can have a positive impact on, to try and help them be successful and their employees have an opportunity to work in an environment that they feel fulfilled and they want to feel valued from. And so I guess there is that opportunity. It's a real challenge to create that, but I think it's something that stands out, and that we as consultancies have an opportunity and probably a purpose behind. I think that we could really have impact globally. I sound like I'm really hoping for much better things in the world. But yeah, that was just my thought on that. Sorry, Zoe, you probably have something more coherent to say.
Thanks. I think one kind of observation, I think Ravi and a couple of the others kind of hit upon it, but I think it's really worth kind of hammering home, is the best change is when it's delivered in partnership with, rather than when it's done to. And if you think about it, work with me on this analogy because I'm saying it while I think about it. It's almost like therapy. Therapy only works where the patient knows that they need help and they know they need to do things better, but they're not quite sure how. So they know there's a problem, but what they need help with are the tools to help themselves cope better or react to things better or be able to change how they're approaching problems. And for me, that's what our role as kind of consultants is. It's not to tell them how to do things, it's to teach techniques that they themselves can take forward and use again and again to react and change and implement change better. And that only works where the end client knows something isn't working right, but just doesn't quite know why. So we can come in and work with them to identify what those kind of problems and pain points are, and then kind of give them our expertise from working with others to say, well, this is how that person and that organization dealt with this. This is what you can learn from them. Here's some best practice. Here's also some things that have gone wrong that you may not want to replicate, and kind of share that expertise. We're there to kind of give that guidance, that coaching and that support. We are not there to do it to them. And I think that's really important, especially kind of as we move into this new world, especially where we're kind of working remotely and in with hybrid teams, etc. It's really fundamental we build those relationships kind of based on a trust that we're going to give them good advice and work with them to test and implement that change, rather than just give them a load of stuff and almost say, here's your homework, this is what you've got to do.
Sure.
Stuck their hands up there, so.
Simon, I hate to interrupt, but I think we should probably move on just to the next question, just because we're running out of time a little bit. So I think one of the key things is the common hurdles that clients and sort of end clients can face, and what can it affect the change. I think what it might be interesting actually, because I think we've probably only got a few minutes to discuss this, potentially Zoe, I don't know I can't remember whether you mentioned it, but you've actually been on that public sector side as the end client and also now on the consultancy side, so maybe you might be sort of apt to jump in here.
Yeah, I think if I ever did a TED talk, kind of the common hurdles and pain points and why change doesn't land would probably be it. And certainly from my experience, having been the end client for so long, it always comes down to culture and leadership. If you don't have that support and kind of willingness to embrace change from the top, no matter how good your kind of transformational engine is, it's not going to land. I think a really good example of that many years ago, back within kind of the GDS days when that was all kicking off, GDS had this great idea about how we would deliver kind of change and how we'd change how government was kind of buying and procuring and, doing digital delivery. And they threw out lots of these kind of what were effectively consultants at the time to all of the departments and said, here's what you've got to do, go do it. And it didn't work probably in 90% of the cases how they thought, because they were just telling the organizations what to do, and the senior leadership at the time had no experience of what these guys were talking about. There was no willingness to change. They were like, no, the way we procure things is absolutely fine. Don't you come along telling us what we should be doing. And it really soured, and those relationships broke down and it didn't work. So the approach GDS then took was to go away and say, actually, let's hire some people from these departments. Let's bring them in-house, train them up, get them working with each other to show the art of the possible, and then send them back out to the departments and get them to work with those departments and slowly start changing that culture. And lo and behold, the delivery began to take, because people like myself were in there and going, oh, well, actually, have we thought about user-centric design? Here's a crazy concept. Maybe we should talk to our users and see what they want to do. Have we thought about maybe agile delivery and bringing our teams together to co-locate? Radical. And actually, by doing it together, rather than just being told what to do, we were slowly able to work with kind of senior leaders and get them on board about actually why this would give value to them. But yeah, without that culture and that buy-in at multiple levels, it was never going to work.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So I think we've only got a few minutes left. So potentially if anybody has a different opinion or something slightly different to add, maybe jump in quickly, and then we'll probably just wrap it up. I think B might have something to say towards the end, and we can always do another session as well. So yeah, maybe Ravi or Simon, I believe.
Sure. So let me jump in. So funnily enough, I had exactly the same answer as Zoe, which is it's about leadership and it's about cultural change. But let me put a slightly different frame on it, which is it's very easy to think about change as a very rational thing. but there is also the political element and the emotional or cultural element of it. And a really successful change program, and the bigger the change, the more you need to consider this, addresses all three elements. So if we work with a lot of industries that are being heavily disrupted, the business model is changing, the way the organization is going to work in the future is fundamentally changing. That means people in the future are going to have less power doing different things. They're going to be working in different ways. Change is a very emotive subject. So I won't talk in this call about how we do that. Maybe that's one for a follow-up. But having an approach and having a way to address the political and the emotional alongside the rational is at the heart of how we overcome those leadership and cultural issues. Simon.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, Ravi. And I guess what I was then going to go on and say is, I think the biggest challenge or the biggest hurdle is recognizing the need for actually supporting delivering change and the scale at which it needs to cover. So it's very easy for organizations to move forward and say, well, I need some support here. And actually the problem lies sort of over here somewhere. It's in a different area. And so that is so often the challenge, is recognizing and seeing actually it's much bigger than just something that is much more transactional. Sorry, Fred.
Yeah. No.
Sorry, I can go with a little bit on Ravi. So I think when we think about change and design things, organizations typically have changed and have experience of change programs, and a lot of the culture, a lot of the resistance, and a whole lot of the emotions Ravi so well brought up actually comes from the recent experience of other changes. So I think there needs to be a lot of making change stick, needs to be predicated on what worked with BPR, what worked with balanced scorecard or any other change, because that is the organization's capability of changing. So a lot of the more agile transformation or digital transformation is organizational change, and the likely result comes from looking at what's the predisposition and culture of accepting change. So that would be my 10 cents, is to also look at what's the recent experience and history of other change programs.
Brilliant. Stephen.
Two words, fear and memory. That's probably the summation of everything. Deal with fear, the fear of unknown uncertainty, the fear of losing my job, and as Fredrik said, the memory, because everybody's gone through innumerable things, changes, transformations, blah, 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 and all of that colors then the response to the new situation. And using the consultants then, probably the biggest focus is how do you get over that hurdle in the leadership team to begin with, and then also then how does that get managed across the entire organization.
Fantastic, thank you guys. I certainly found that quite insightful. I think what would be good, just to sort of wrap up and at least finish off for now, would be if everyone just wanted to almost give one point that they've learned from today. You're all from very different sort of organizations, and almost a sort of a take home and action for moving forwards. Ravi, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So one thing I found really interesting was the talk about the new normal or the new paradigm. And one thing I've thought about in the past but never given a great deal of thought of is, where are people coming from? So I thought it was really interesting to hear Stephen say, actually, we've always been very, very distributed, and we've got people in New Zealand and all around the world. Whereas I come from a background where we are London centric, and people have always been able to meet up when needed. I think working towards what does the future look like is a really interesting cultural challenge that all organizations need to face. And I think the organizations who address that challenge the best will be the ones that get the best talent in the future, because we're certainly finding, as we build our own team and as our clients continue to grow and build their teams, the job market is incredibly competitive. It always will be. And the best people have lots of options. So how do you meet their needs in the future? And I think it's still evolving. I don't think the answer is set. So that's my one big takeaway.
Thank you. Simon, do you want to jump in next?
Oh,
Sorry, deep end.
I'm going to sort of slightly sidetrack this and say that I sort of agree with Ravi. I think, you know, fundamentally the challenge here is around being able to retain, and then in retaining them is exactly that, is how you can leverage those skills and capabilities. So I think that's a really interesting point to think about, and you know, recognizing the sort of real challenge and different dimensions of cultural background and experience, and be able to leverage that in delivering change, transformation, actually brings another dynamic and another dimension to how you can really be successful in landing change, essentially. So yeah, I feel like I've sort of ducked a bullet there, but I think it's a really great point.
Fab. Stephen, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I think one of the things that just came to me is that the key takeaway from this is that all businesses are now innovation businesses. We're innovating the new world, and the sooner that we as consultancies and then through our clients can accept that and embrace that, the more successful we'll become. And from my experience, the ones who have resisted innovating, who have, you know, kind of tried to cling to the old ways, have always had the hardest problems and are facing the most difficulties right now. And I think that is so clear in many different sectors. So I think that was kind of the thing that emerged from this conversation that we were having.
Fab. Zoe, do you want to?
Yeah, I think building on Stephen's point actually a bit, I think as consultancies, one of the things we can probably all be better at doing is talking about that kind of innovation journey we're all going on. And it's not just talking about what we've done with our clients to help them through it, but what have we done ourselves to help ourselves through it. A previous boss of mine always used to have the phrase, it's like eating your own dog food. How, you know, you need to know it tastes nice. I'm never convinced by that, but it is, you know, we've all got to be better at talking openly and being transparent about that journey we're on and what we've learned from it and what we can help each other learn and kind of bring in and innovate going forward.
But then Fredrik.
Yeah, so we have also used the dog food analogy, and I was kindly asked and advised to use drink your own champagne. So there is definitely a lot in there. I think in the sense of we are now in a fortunate position to, as Stephen said, the world is now have proven itself more uncertain than we knew before 2020, and it should be our job as supporters of change and good to make sure organizations get the capability and adjust to changing ideas, changing environment, and changing conditions. So the takeaway in that sense is that we have even more responsibility to help organizations navigate uncertainty and change.
Fantastic. Well, look, guys, I just want to say a massive thank you from Francesca and from myself. You know, everyone being a part of today, both panelists and also guests. I've actually just had a point come through in the chat. So Anne Mary says, really reflective conversation, helps to contextualize some challenges we see, acknowledge where we are and what we still need to do. So Anne, look, really glad you enjoyed. Yeah, we'll be, I think potentially a follow-up on this one. We obviously didn't get through all our questions, so it would be fab to get everyone back together, at some point in the near future. Recording will be live in the next sort of couple of days. It'll be sent to everyone who's been here today, and posted on our LinkedIn pages. So keep your eyes sort of peeled for that, and hopefully see you all very soon.
Brilliant. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.